Alright, keeping going with this, the 11th chapter of Darkangel, the Return. Ariel has visited the vampire, and she gave the Duro his satchel back that he had given her with the food inside of it. It's got the horse's hooves in it. He's going to be brewing it for the wedding cup for the vampire. Ariel's got to make the gown, and so we continue. When Ariel came to the room of the wraiths, they were much as she had seen them. When she had first come to the castle, they paced the floor, or sat rocking and moaning, or writhed and shrieked and tore their hair. They were all of them still as mummified birds. Their starved faces held only dark, eyeless hollows, and their hair hung stiff and brittle as nettle seed silk. She still could tell none of them apart. The only difference was that the garments they wore were not the coarse, drab things she had seen them in at first, but light, airy shifts of spun charity. The wraiths saw her standing in the doorway all at once, and some of them gave a feeble cry. She went into the room among them, and they all gathered around and reached to touch her, as though they could not believe she was really there. "You have come back," they said. "You have come back. You were gone a long time. We called for you and called," the lethargy of their voices telling Ariel how pitifully their wits had dulled in her absence. "We grew so lonely with no one to talk to and sing us tales," they mumbled. Ariel bit her lip, let out her breath, and hoped she might over the day-month's time, restore their facilities somewhat. "Why did you stay away so long?" pleaded the wraiths. "I ran away from the castle," said Ariel. "But he caught you again and returned you," they moaned. She shook her head. "He caught me once, but at the last I got away." "But why did you return?" they cried, rousing. "If you escaped him." Ariel smiled. Already their reason seemed to be quickening. "I only went because I had an errand to do. Now that it is done, so I returned." "But it is madness," cried the wraiths. "You were safe away from him. Why did you come back?" "I promised I would help you," said Ariel. "I could not leave you stranded here to die." "We are grateful," said the wraiths, subsiding. They dropped their voices, glanced furtively around. "But you must hide. He will kill you if he finds you." "He knows I am here," Ariel replied, taking up her spindle from the floor where she had left it last. "And he means to kill me tomorrow." The wraiths began to moan, but she soothed them. "Hush! Much may befall betwixt now and then." She sat down on the low stool among the wraiths and began to spin. She was months out of practice, but she had not lost the knack. Immediately a golden thread sprang to her fingers, and she let the turning spindle drop. She had a host of new-learned desert tales to spin for them as well. "Now," she said, "shall I tell you of my journey over the desert and under the plain?" And I'm just going to keep going. We'll finish this chapter. There's only a couple pages left. Ariel spent much of her time with the wraiths, spinning the thread for the garment of the vampire's new bride and telling them stories of her sojourn on the desert and plain. She also went up to see the gargoyles often. At first they were as starved and savage as before, but after she had fed them, they grew tame again, so docile, in fact, that though they still snapped and fought among themselves, some of them allowed her to caress them briefly, and a few would even take food from her hand. She fell to studying the silver lashes that held them to the tower, and she saw that the chains were attached to each smooth brazen collar, not by means of a lock or even a welded link, but rather by a slotted silver pin that might, by the proper sequence of sliding and turning, be slipped free. None the less, though the weird beasts constantly tore and worried their shackles, Ariel perceived that only a human hand could trip the bolts and unloose their chains. What time she did not spend with the wraiths and the gargoyles, she spent down in the caves with the Duro. He had converted the main treasury room into a sort of laboratory, a complex apparatus of slender metal tubes extended around the periphery, with hardly a break, so that Ariel could scarcely get in the door. Many dusty old books lay open about the floor, though the middle of the room though in the middle of the room there still left considerable open space, and at the very center the little fire burned as usual, unflagging and undying. "Tell me," said Ariel, sitting beside the fire, "how will this help us kill the vampire?" The little man bustled about the apparatus. He hurried over to a book to consult some diagram or formula, then hurried back to adjust the flame under one of his bubbling containers. Then he brushed off his hands and came to sit by the fire with Ariel. "Out of this," he replied, gesturing at his handiwork, "I should distill the bridal cup." "You mean to poison him?" said Ariel quietly. Somehow she had never before brought herself to speculate what method they would use. It had not seemed real enough, but now the deed was imminent. Poison. So it was to be poison. It brought a bitterness into her mouth, knowing. But the Duro was shaking his head. "Daughter," he chided, "the Darkangel is poisoned already. This cup is no harm to any living creature, such as you or I, but to a vampire, well, what must I do?" "You must give it to the bride to have him drink for a wedding toast. Do this when you attend her. By the way, how comes the spinning?" "The spinning is done," said Ariel, "and the weaving will be by late afternoon." She glanced over at the Duro's distillery. "And the Icarus," she said. "I have not seen him lately. Where is he?" The Duro rose and dusted his hands, turned back toward his apparatus. "He has flown," he answered. "He flew at noon to find a bride." The little man paused a moment, glanced back over his shoulder at Ariel. "And you, daughter, how are you bearing up? Still troubled dreams?" She looked away, nodded. Sometimes. Her sleep was never free of the Darkangel now. Strange, when she had been beneath his spell, she had never dreamed of him. Ariel rubbed his arms. "When the Darkangel is dead," she murmured, more to herself than to the mage, "they will trouble me no more." She stood silent a moment, looking at nothing. Even now she could not shake off the cold. "It chills me to think what we are planning," she said. Across from her, Taub sighed, turned back to adjusting his tubes and vials. "It chills me too, betimes, daughter. But would you rather accept the alternative?" Ariel touched her throat and shook her head. "No, no." She rose and shoved the thought from her mind. If they did not slay the Darkangel, their world would fall. She dropped her chafing arms and sighed. "Well, if, as you said, the vampire has flown, I must go to them and set them free." The Duro half turned. "What's that?" he said. "What do you mean? The wraiths?" Ariel shook her head. "The gargoyles," she replied. "I resolved to free them as soon as he was gone." The little man's brows drew together worriedly. "Daughter, he will not be much pleased with that when he returns." Ariel sighed and shook herself. "It makes no matter. To please him is no longer my great concern." She was a little surprised at the boldness of her words, even more surprised to find that they were true. The gargoyles suffer, I shall free them. The Duro looked at her then in very wonderment. "5 months of desert life," he said softly. "Ah, mistress, how you have changed." And that's the end of chapter 11.